This is my real story. My name is Rachel Meyers. I'm 23 years old, and what happened to me still sends shivers down my spine because it was not just a haunting but a revenge that followed me and my family no matter how far we ran. I'm sharing this with you not because I want sympathy, but because you need to know how dangerous it can be when you disturb something that should have been left alone. It all began when my parents decided to move us into a house deep in Hollow Pines, a place that looked beautiful on the outside but carried scars inside its walls, scars of people who never truly left. This story is terrifying and real, and I am telling you piece by piece so you will understand how it destroyed everything I once loved. Please, before we begin, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this channel so more people can hear stories like this one. This story is written and edited by Dark Lifeside Diaries. The day we first arrived at Hollow Pines was cold and strangely quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful but instead makes you feel watched, and I remember sitting in the back of my dad's old SUV staring at the looming house through the windshield as the last rays of sunlight cut through the trees. And there was this unsettling heaviness in the air, almost like the woods themselves were breathing around us, and while my mom excitedly pointed at the porch saying how much she loved the rustic design, I could only focus on the cracked shutters and the way one of the upstairs windows seemed darker than the others, like it swallowed the light instead of reflecting it. And in that moment, though I didn't say it out loud, I felt something already waiting for us inside, something patient, something angry. Moving was supposed to be a fresh start for us because after my dad lost his job in the city, he inherited this property from a distant uncle none of us really knew, and the thought of not having to pay rent anymore made my parents relieved. But I kept wondering why someone would leave a house like this abandoned for years if it was such a gift. And as soon as we stepped inside the front door, the smell hit us, not like mold exactly, but more like something sour and rotten layered beneath fresh paint, because clearly someone had tried to cover up the stench. And I remember running my fingers along the banister and feeling splinters dig into my skin, like the wood didn't want to be touched. The first night should have been peaceful since we were exhausted, but I couldn't sleep. And as I lay in my room staring at the old floral wallpaper peeling in the corners, I swear I heard whispering just behind the wall, so faint it could almost be mistaken for wind, except the windows were closed tight, and every time I tried to focus on the words, they would stop, leaving me in a silence that pressed against my ears like a scream being held back. My brother Josh, who was 16 and always trying to act tough, laughed at me when I mentioned it in the morning, but even he had bags under his eyes, and when I pressed him, he admitted he had dreamed of someone standing at the end of his bed, not moving, not breathing, just watching him in the dark. And the fact that his description matched the shadow I thought I saw pass across my window around 3 a.m. made me keep my mouth shut the next time I heard things. Over the next few days, the house seemed to settle around us in ways that didn't feel natural. The floors didn't just creak, they groaned long and low, like voices sighing under our weight. Doors would open slowly as if pushed by invisible hands instead of drafts, and sometimes I'd catch my mom pausing mid-sentence with this glazed look in her eyes, like she was listening to someone else speaking to her. But when I'd ask, she'd snap back and act like nothing happened. Strangest thing, though, was the attic, because it was locked with a rusted padlock, and when Dad tried to open it the first week, the key snapped in half like the lock didn't want to be disturbed, and instead of forcing it open, he shrugged and said we'd deal with it later. But every night after that, I would hear scraping noises from directly above my room, heavy dragging sounds as though furniture was being moved even though nobody could get in there, and I swear sometimes it sounded like claws scratching against the wood, desperate to get out. One afternoon when I came home from a walk through the woods, I saw an old woman standing near the edge of our property line, her back slightly hunched and her eyes impossibly pale, almost cloudy like someone blind, but she stared directly at me unblinking, and when I waved nervously, she lifted her hand in the slowest motion I'd ever seen, pointing not at me but at the attic window. And before I could say anything, my mom called me inside, and when I looked back, the woman was gone, as if she'd melted into the trees. But that night I dreamed of her standing in the corner of my room, whispering words I couldn't understand, her finger still pointing upward. And I woke up screaming with scratches down my arm that hadn't been there before. I fell asleep. My parents brushed it off as me probably hurting myself in the woods, but I knew what I felt, and things only got worse because the house wasn't just haunted, it was alive, feeding off us, and it had waited a long time for someone to disturb its silence. The second week in Hollow Pines was when the house stopped pretending to be just old and broken and finally showed us what it really was, because little by little it twisted itself into our lives in ways we couldn't ignore anymore. And I swear it started with the mirror since every time I brushed my teeth or passed the hallway glass, I'd catch glimpses of things behind me that weren't there when I turned, shapes in the background that seemed too tall or too thin to be any of us, and one night as I was brushing my hair, the mirror fogged up from nowhere even though there was no steam in the room, and a handprint appeared right behind my reflection, bigger than mine, with long, stretched fingers pressing against the glass, and when I screamed my dad rushed in but caught nothing, only shaking his head and muttering about stress, but the way his voice cracked told me he wasn't as confident as he wanted to seem. And later that same night, Josh came running into my room pale as chalk, saying someone had whispered his name in the dark right next to his ear, but when he flicked the lights on, the only thing he saw was his chair slowly rocking back and forth as if someone had just been sitting there. By then, sleep was a stranger in our house because the more nights passed, the more it felt like the walls themselves were breathing, the more it felt like the shadows stretched too far across the floor, the more it felt like something wanted us to know it was awake, and my mom, who usually tried to keep everything together, started humming lullabies under her breath, lullabies she had never sung before and swore she didn't even know when I asked, but I'd wake up in the middle of the night hearing her voice outside my room, her shadow sliding along the crack under my door, the melody off-key, almost broken, and when I worked up the courage to open it once, she wasn't there at all, just empty hallway with a chill in the air and a sound like footsteps running away. The attic became an obsession for all of us because the noises from above grew louder, dragging, scratching, sometimes even pounding so hard it rattled the light fixtures, and finally, Dad brought home tools to break the padlock, but the moment he raised the hammer, every bulb in the house exploded at once, showering us in sparks, and in the sudden dark, I swear, I heard laughter echoing down the stairs, laughter that didn't belong to any of us, laughter layered like multiple voices at once, mocking us for even trying. And when the lights finally came back, the padlock was already twisted open like invisible hands had crushed the metal themselves, leaving the door slightly ajar, daring us to go inside. My dad tried to act brave, so with a flashlight in one hand and a crowbar in the other, he pulled the attic stairs down the wood, groaning as though reluctant to let us climb, and I followed close behind despite my legs shaking because I couldn't stand staying downstairs alone. And when we reached the top, the beam of the flashlight cut across dust and old boxes, but it also revealed something worse. A circle burned into the wooden floor, black and uneven, surrounded by strange markings that looked like symbols carved deep into the boards, some fresh as if cut only days ago, and in the center of the circle sat a small porcelain doll, its dress torn and face cracked, but what made me freeze was its eyes. They weren't painted like normal dolls, but actual glassy orbs that seemed wet, almost alive, and as the light landed on it, I swear its lips curved into the faintest smile. My mom gasped and reached for it, but Dad yanked her back, muttering that we shouldn't touch anything yet. Even as he said it, the temperature dropped so suddenly we could see our breath, and the attic door slammed shut behind us, plunging us into a darkness so thick it felt like being buried alive. And then came the whispers, hundreds of them all at once, overlapping, rising into screams, and through it all, I heard one phrase, clear as day: she belongs to us now. And though I didn't know who they meant, I felt every word vibrate inside my bones somehow. Dad forced the door back open and we stumbled out shaking, but something followed us because from that night onward, the house wasn't just haunted, it was hunting, choosing one of us at a time to torment more than the others, and unfortunately it chose my mom first. She began to change, at first subtly, like forgetting things she'd just said, staring at corners of the room for too long, or answering questions no one had asked. But soon it became undeniable because one evening I found her in the kitchen, cutting vegetables, her lips moving as though in prayer. Except the words weren't English, they weren't any language I ever heard, low guttural sounds that made my skin crawl, and when I touched her arm she jerked so hard the knife clattered to the floor. In her eyes they were bloodshot and distant, like she hadn't slept in days, and all she whispered was, "They want you, Rachel, they've been waiting for you." Before collapsing in tears that night, I locked my door and pushed a chair against it, but it didn't matter because at exactly 3:15 a.m. the knob started to turn slowly back and forth, until finally the chair scraped across the floor as if shoved from the other side, and though I pressed my back against the door with all my weight, I could still feel something pushing harder and harder until suddenly it stopped, leaving me shaking in silence. And when I dared to check, the hallway was empty except for muddy footprints leading away toward the attic stairs, footprints too small to belong to my dad or brother. Almost like a child's, though we had no child in the house. My dad wanted to leave the next morning, pack everything and go, but every attempt failed because the car wouldn't start, the phone lines went dead, and even when he tried to hike into town, he came back hours later confused and pale, saying every trail twisted back to the house no matter which direction he took, as if the woods themselves were folding us inward, trapping us like prey. And that's when I realized we weren't just dealing with a haunting, we were prisoners caught in something older, darker, something tied to that circle in the attic, something that didn't want us to leave alive after. That night when my dad admitted the woods wouldn't let him out, everything in the house seemed to tighten around, used like a noose, every sound sharper, every shadow longer, and it felt as if Hollow Pines itself was breathing with hunger, waiting for us to break. And my mom was the first to crack because she stopped eating altogether, sitting at the table with her fork clutched in her hand like she didn't even know what it was, staring at the walls as if someone was whispering from inside them. And when I shook her once to snap her out of it, she whispered, "Don't wake them," in a voice that wasn't hers, lower, raspier, almost like something had borrowed her throat. And it chilled me so badly that I stopped touching her after that. My dad tried to hold us together, forcing Josh and me to sit down for family dinners, even though none of us had the appetite, and it became a sick ritual, him trying to pray before meals, Josh pretending to laugh at jokes that didn't land, me pushing food around my plate, while my mom muttered to herself and sometimes smiled at the empty chair across from her, nodding like she was in conversation with someone. Only she could see the attic noises grew louder each night, but it wasn't just dragging and scratching anymore, it was footsteps, tiny bare feet pacing the boards directly above our heads, sometimes running so fast it sounded like multiple children were playing tag. And one night I even heard giggles, high-pitched, cruel giggles that stopped instantly when I whispered Josh's name across the hall, leaving the silence more suffocating than the sound. And though Josh tried to act brave, I caught him crying in his room with his headphones jammed into his ears, blasting music to drown out the whispers that seemed to curl through every corner of the house. The doll in the attic was still there, but it didn't stay put anymore. One morning, I found it sitting at the bottom of the stairs, its cracked face tilted upward like it had been watching us sleep all night. And when Dad hurled it back into the attic, slamming the door shut, the thing was back in the living room the very next day, perched on the couch like an unwanted guest. And though he tried burning it in the fireplace, the flames sputtered and died instantly, choking the room with thick black smoke. And when the ashes cleared, the doll was untouched, sitting on the logs. As if mocking our attempt to destroy it, I began to dream of the old woman from the woods again, the one who pointed at the attic, except now in my dreams she wasn't silent. She whispered in broken fragments, blood owed, debts unpaid. They never left, and each time I woke I would find my sheets stained with dirt, as though I had been walking outside in my sleep, my bare feet muddy and cold. But I had no memory of leaving my bed, and the more it happened, the more I wondered if I was becoming part of whatever curse wrapped this place, if it was pulling me into its history piece by piece. Things escalated fast when Josh went missing one night. We had all gone to bed tense but quiet, and sometime around 3 in the morning I heard my mom humming again, except this time it wasn't outside my door but echoing from upstairs from the attic. And when I bolted out of my room, I saw Josh climbing the stairs like he was sleepwalking, his eyes glazed, moving toward the attic door that now hung wide open as though it had been waiting for him. And I screamed his name, but my voice didn't break through. My dad sprinting past me to grab him just as he disappeared inside. But by the time we reached the top, the room was empty. No Josh, no sound, nothing but the circle on the floor glowing faintly red like embers under wood, and the doll sitting in the center with its head tilted down. And when I touched the circle's edge, my hand burned as though the boards were hot, and Dad yanked me back, slamming the attic door shut as my mom laughed downstairs, this hollow laugh that wasn't hers anymore. We searched the house for hours, calling Josh's name until our voices cracked, but he never came back that night. And when the sun finally rose, his backpack was sitting neatly on the porch, zipped tight with mud caked across the straps like it had been dragged through the woods. And though Dad shouted that he would find him, he never stepped past the property line again, as if he already knew the woods wouldn't let him. That day stretched into the longest one of my life, because my mom barely acknowledged Josh's absence, just kept talking to the empty chair, murmuring things like, "He's playing. Now let him play." And when I tried to shake her, begging her to tell me where he was, her head snapped toward me with this jerky movement. Her eyes, black like her pupils, had swallowed all the white, and she hissed, actually hissed, "Don't take him from them, Rachel, he's theirs now," before slamming her fists on the table so hard the plates shattered. I locked myself in my room for hours after that, trying to pray, though I wasn't even sure who to pray to because every shadow felt like it was listening, and when night fell again, the whispers returned louder than ever, weaving my name into their chorus, chanting, "Rachel, Rachel, Rachel," until I covered my ears and screamed, but the voices only grew more delighted, like my fear was feeding them. And then I saw Josh standing at the end of my bed, his clothes dirty, his skin-pale eyes empty, and though I wanted to run to him, something in me knew it wasn't him anymore, because when he opened his mouth, dozens of voices poured out, overlapping like the screams of the dead. And the last thing I remember before fainting was his smile stretching wider than it should have, the doll clutched in his hands like it was guiding him. When I woke the next morning, Dad was gone. Too, his boots were missing the front door wide open, but there were no footprints leading away, no sign he'd ever stepped outside. Just silence pressing harder against the walls, as if the house itself was swallowing him piece by piece. And when I begged my mom to help me look, she only rocked in her chair, humming, her eyes fixed on the ceiling as though she could see through the floors into the attic above, whispering, one more, then it's done," like some prophecy she had no control over. That was when I realized the house didn't want all of us. It wanted me. It always wanted me, and everyone else was just collateral pawns in a game that had been playing long before we arrived, and no matter how much I wanted to deny it, the evidence was everywhere. The old woman's warnings, the voices calling my name, the scratches on my arms after dreams, the way my family vanished one by one while I was left behind to witness it. And deep down I knew part 4 of this nightmare would be mine alone, a confrontation with whatever cursed force ruled Hollow Pines, and either I would escape or I would never leave these walls, just another voice whispering in the dark for the next family to find. The night after my father disappeared, I sat in my room with every light on, clutching a flashlight in one hand and a Bible in the other, even though I wasn't religious, because fear makes you cling to anything that feels solid, but no light or prayer could hide the fact that I was alone now, or at least alone in the sense of family, because the house was more alive than ever, its whispers swelling through the halls like a heartbeat, and the shadows moving in ways that shadows shouldn't move, bending around corners, stretching across the ceiling, reaching for me as if eager to claim the last soul it had trapped within its walls. And though I wanted to run, to break every window and sprint into the woods, I already knew it was pointless, because the woods weren't real anymore. They were just an endless loop designed to keep me here, and if I was going to survive, I had to face whatever was in that attic, because everything pointed back to it. The old woman, the doll, the voices, all of it leading to the circle scorched into the floor above me at exactly 3:15. The hour that had become cursed in our house. I heard the attic door creak open on its own, the wooden stairs lowering with agonizing slowness, and I don't know what force moved my legs, but I found myself climbing the air colder with every step, my breath fogging out in front of me as the voices grew louder, not whispers anymore, but a chant, dozens, maybe hundreds of voices, all speaking in unison, "Rachel, Rachel, Rachel," until it became deafening. And when I stepped into the attic, the glow from the circle was brighter than ever, pulsing red like a heartbeat, and sitting in its center was the doll, but it wasn't cracked porcelain anymore, it was flesh, its glass eyes alive and rolling in their sockets, its lips wet as it smiled at me, and around it stood the figures of my family, my mother, my father, my brother, only they weren't truly them, their faces slack and pale, eyes black, their bodies stiff as if strings held them upright, and when they spoke it wasn't their voices but the same layered chorus that had haunted me, all crying out, "Join us, Rachel, join us now." I dropped to my knees, tears blinding me, begging them to fight it to come back to me, but my mother only tilted her head and hissed, "We are already theirs," and then she lunged forward, her arms jerking unnaturally like a puppet's, and though I scrambled back, my dad and Josh followed, their hands reaching for me, their fingers ice cold as they brushed my skin. And I knew then that whatever was in this house had devoured them, turned them into shells, and if I let them touch me again, it would take me too. I forced myself to look at the circle, at the symbols carved deep into the wood, and though I couldn't understand them, something inside me whispered that it was a binding ritual, a contract of revenge, something left behind by whoever first cursed this place. And I remembered the old woman's words, debts unpaid, blood owed, and it all clicked. This house was never just haunted, it was a prison, built for souls wronged long ago. A place where their pain was fed by the living, passed from family to family like an endless cycle, and unless someone broke, it would go on forever. My hands shook as I picked up the Bible, screaming verses I didn't even remember memorizing, my voice breaking through the chant for just a moment, and the doll shrieked an ear-piercing sound that rattled the walls, its skin blistering, and the figures of my family froze, their faces twisting in anguish as if for a brief second they were themselves again. And Josh whispered, "Don't stop, Ray, finish it," before his eyes rolled back and he collapsed, and I realized If I wanted to free them, if I wanted to end this, I had to burn the circle no matter what. With adrenaline flooding me, I knocked over the lantern Dad had left in the corner, and flames spread instantly, licking across the floor, devouring the ancient wood. And as the fire touched the symbols, the voices screamed in fury, the house shaking violently like it was alive, beams cracking, dust raining from the ceiling, and my mother's body lunged at me again, but this time her eyes were her own, filled with tears, and she whispered, "Run," before collapsing into the flames, her body consumed as the shadows around her writhed like snakes. I stumbled down the attic stairs, the fire chasing me, smoke filling my lungs, and though the whispers followed, they were weaker now, fractured, no longer unified, and as I reached the front door, it finally opened without resistance. The woods beyond no longer twisted, but clear, real, and for the first time since we moved to Hollow Pines, I felt air that wasn't heavy with malice. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing in the dirt road that led back to town, and when I looked back, the house was engulfed in flames, its windows glowing like furious eyes, the roof collapsing in on itself, and through the roar of the fire I swore I heard a final scream, one that wasn't human, and then silence. True silence settling over the land, as if the curse had finally been broken. By morning the house was nothing but smoldering ash, the woods eerily calm, and when the townspeople found me, they asked what happened, but I couldn't speak because how do you explain that your family was eaten by a house that your mother begged you to run while her body burned, that your brother's last words were telling you to finish a ritual you didn't even understand? They didn't believe me, of course. Rumors spread about me setting the fire myself, about me going mad, but deep down, I knew the truth. The curse of Hollow Pines was broken, my family's souls freed. And though I survived, I would never truly escape what I saw, because every night I closed my eyes, I still hear the whispers calling my name, softer now, but always there, reminding me that debts are never fully paid, that revenge never truly ends, and sometimes I wonder if one day the voices will return louder than before to claim me after all. For now, though, all I can do is tell this story to warn you, to beg you never to step into places that feel wrong, never to ignore the weight in the air when you know something is watching, because if you do, you may not be as lucky as I was to escape. Thanks. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this channel to keep supporting these true horror stories.